Hey, it's Noah and welcome back to the barn. In March of 2023, a good buddy from my day job said, "Would you build me a dining set for my awkwardly shaped kitchen?" And I said, "Of course I can do that." I drew him up this model and we were both excited about the design. I completed the dining table in my most recent video, and now it's time to make the matching floating top bench. This smaller piece can be considered the little brother to the dining table, as many of the structural elements and joinery are almost identical aside from proportion. Again, I would like to give a huge shout out to my work buddy, as this bench took another month or two to complete. Dude was patient with me the entire time. My long-term goal is to quit my day job and woodwork full-time, so please support me by liking this video and subscribing to my channel. Sketchup plans for the dining set can be found in the description below. I started by milling up the pieces for the base of the bench. When I built the dining table, I worked from the top down. This time I'm working from the bottom up, starting with the legs and wooden rectangle that holds the legs together. I rough milled the black walnut and white oak early in the process to let them sit for a while. This might be counterintuitive, but when you cut a piece of wood, it releases internal stresses. So it's a good idea to rough cut, wait a week, fine tune, wait a week, and then tune again, inching closer and closer to the final dimensions of the piece. The legs are tapered on two sides, so I use the bandsaw to rough cut the majority of the waste away. And then I could go in and refine the lines with my hand plane. Once the tapers were smooth, I could go in and rough cut the large rabbets at the top of the legs on the bandsaw. This rabbet helps with the vertical stability of the bench and gives the black walnut rectangle something to rest on top of, further supporting the weight of the humans who will be sitting on it. I could then chisel to the line and make the faces flat with my shoulder plane. As I was building the bench, I was always considering stability and strength, as a failure due to overweighting the bench would be catastrophic and embarrassing. I cut the pieces that make up the walnut rectangle to length on the miter saw and proceeded to cut the miters at each end. Originally, I tried to glue the mitered rectangle first, and then the legs to the rectangle, but that failed miserably. So I resorted to gluing up the three corner pieces together all in one go. It worked out well and the joints are relatively seamless. If anyone can spot what I'm doing wrong here, you get a gold star. Go ahead and pause the video and see if you can guess it. Okay, so I jumped the gun on the glue up. Remember the cross bracing with the tusk tenons? Yeah, I was hoping to do mortise and tenon joinery on the pieces that connect the legs. But don't worry, I'll address how I fix this later. I made some white oak dowels to further strengthen the leg joints against any weird shear forces that would weaken the glue joint over time. I cut the white oak pieces to length and could start working on joining them to the top of the base. Everything was pretty flat at this point, and I was a little surprised at how well the pieces were coming together. cut a small 1/4-inch channel in the white oak pieces on both sides so that they could sit on top of the walnut rectangle at the top of the base. I made 2 cuts by hand, then chiseled away some waste across the grain. I could then chisel the marked lines straight downward and finally router plane the bottom of the channel. I went ahead and pre-finished the base before gluing the white oak pieces onto the top. It was easier to do the sanding when the components were separate. This was a lesson that I learned from building the matching table. Once the sanding had been done, I could go ahead and glue the pieces on. And that's the base done for now. I can now turn my attention towards the top of the bench. I glued up 3 rectangular pieces of black walnut off camera and cut the ends to length on the miter saw. This piece of wood is 15 inches wide, which is just a little too large for my 13-inch planer. I was planning on taking this piece down the road to be surfaced by a big machine with a different table project, but I ultimately felt it wasn't worth it and decided to mill the piece flat by hand. I learned how to do this from a YouTube video made by Christopher Schwartz. There are a ton of different methods, but I've found his to make the most sense to me. I'll leave a link to his video in the description. It's an awesome watch and he's an excellent teacher. To summarize, almost every piece of wood that is flat and wide, like the one I have here, is cupped on one face and bowed on the other. You relieve one edge and then use a number 5 or number 6 jack plane to go across the grain on the cupped side, taking meaty chunks out of the wood. It's important to use the cupped side because the high edges that your plane rides on top of create a theoretically flat plane or reference surface. Once you've whittled down the high edges, what you're left with is a relatively flat face. You can then use your jointer plane to take down any errant high spots along the grain. I used my straight edge to confirm by rocking it back and forth over the high spots until it didn't rock anymore. You can drive yourself insane chasing perfect flatness, so I'd say a tolerance of 1 or 2 mil for handwork is perfectly acceptable, but that's just me. Once one side is flat, you can use a marking gauge to mark the thickness of the board. As Chris describes in his video, this side is bowed, so you need to jack out the middle, basically creating the same low channel that was originally on the cup side. Then you can repeat the same process, taking big passes across the grain. This time you have an advantage though, because the depth is marked, so you can simply plane until you hit the lines on all sides, making sure you don't accidentally cup the middle of the board. I got a little lazy and ended up using my power plane to speed the process up a bit. Once the top was flat, I could do a dry run of the bench to see it in its rough form. I marked and routed small channels into the top for the white oak pieces to nest into. I used a straight edge and a router template to remove the majority of the waste, and then refine the fit with my chisel. I could then start on the big chamfers on the underside of the bench top. I used the power plane to get rid of the majority of the waste and then used my smoothing plane to refine the lines. That's the top done for now, and I can try to fix the mistake I made earlier in the build. I knew that I needed to add cross bracing to the bench to make it more stable, but I wasn't sure how I was going to do it, as a mortise and tenon joint was out of the question. Eventually, after sleeping on it for a few days, I came up with a decent solution. I would create a cross bracing separately and then use wood screws to fasten it to the base of the bench. I would drill a hole for the top of the screw and plug the hole with a dowel. I wanted a compromise that still looked nice, as the black walnut dowel wouldn't be that noticeable, and arguably it added more stability as the pieces were fastened together with metal fasteners. So with a plan in mind, I set about milling pieces and cutting the joinery for the cross bracing. I had never done a tusked mortise and tenon before, so this was an interesting challenge for me. There was a lot of hand tool and chisel work to get the mortises and tenons fitting right. I cut the white oak tusks out on the bandsaw. I opted for a more geometric sort of look to the tusks, as opposed to a more curvy and elongated form. I wanted the tusks to sort of match the geometric quality of the floating top and look a bit more rigid and structural. My wife sighed and said, that's not really my style, which has to be the most passive-aggressive and vague way to say, I wouldn't have made them like that. I think they turned out great, but let me know what you think in the comments. I used the drill press to remove the majority of the waste before chiseling. Once the joinery was done, I could drill pilot holes through both pieces to accept the wood screws and then drill the larger hole to accept the small walnut dowel. After a little pre-finished sanding, I could do a final assembly of the base and bench by screwing everything in place and wood gluing in the dowels. Once the base was completed, I could set about sanding the top of the bench, and then I glued it in place. I ended up using a little too much wood glue here, and once things are prepped for finish, errant glue spots become much more noticeable. This is something I'm hoping to improve on in future builds. And my brother, who's an avid woodworker, pointed out that I'm using Titebond 3, which isn't the best choice as far as cleaning up errant glue spots. used Osmo wood finish to match the dining table. I painted on one coat and then used a couple coats of my wood butter on the top, which is just the beeswax and raw linseed oil mixture. And that's the bench finished. This time my buddy came over to the house to pick up the completed piece, which fit nicely into his car. Oh, that's cool that you can do that from your back. That's the best. Wow. It felt great to have this entire dining set done, as it took almost 10 months to complete from start to finish. I think the bench turned out even better than the table. I really like the sleek look and side profile. It looks lightweight in construction, but I'll bet it could hold a baby elephant. Thank you so much for watching this far, and I'll see you in the next one. I'm so confused by that.